I'm going to read you from the introduction of a book called The Christian Overview Addiction. It says, I'm on chapter 3. How about the introduction? Life as he knew it was over. He didn't know how he knew that, but he knew it. It would never be the same. His aching head rested on the cold tile floor of the bathroom. He could sense his mind being rearranged. Somehow not his own doing. He needed to get up, to pull himself together. He couldn't let his wife find him like this. She would never get off his case about his partying. His mind could not make his body move. What happened to him? This was a first, a numb body. It took a moment to begin to feel his arms and another moment or two to begin to feel his legs. And then that feeling quickly turned to pain as he realized he was laying on top of both his arms. He had to get up quickly before she found him. He rolled on his side to free his arms, and he thought again he really must have done something last night on himself to feel this bad. That would certainly explain the way his body felt. But what about what he was thinking? What was different? Why did he feel so strange, such a change? How did he know that his life would be very different very soon? What happened to him? What had he done to himself last night? He had to get up. He couldn't let anyone see him like this. He was supposed to be the guy who held it all together. The guy who could fix anything and do everything. The guy that everyone came to when they needed help. His life was falling apart, and he didn't have a clue of how to fix it. What was happening? How could the things got so far out of hand? He tried to remember what happened last night, but he only found bits and pieces of scenes and confusion. Oh God, what had he done? He had promised he would not get loaded again. She was going to kill him. He had promised to go to meetings and try to work out a program to stay clean and sober. He had promised, just as he had a dozen times before, when he failed to keep his promises. What had happened? When he finally got himself into a sitting position, he rested his head against the wall, and he felt as though he was sick enough to die. He'd been getting sicker and sicker each time he got loaded. But what had he done last night? What time was it? A scene of him pounding on the front door flashed through his mind. The thought of it made him sick to his stomach. He knew what he had done. Oh God, he knew what he had done, and this time he could not take it back. He pulled himself up under the commode, and the scenes from last night began to play themselves before him. A broken door, a child crying, his wife screaming at him. Oh God, what had he done? His head began to pound, his body began to shake, and he was in a world of hurt. He looked down at the front of his shirt, and it was covered in blood. He stood and looked in the mirror, but he could not bring himself to make eye contact with that face in the mirror. He could not stand to look at himself. He hated himself for what he knew he had done. He better find out how bad the damage really was, and he just knew she'd be furious at him. But she'd get over it. She always did. This time it might take a little longer, but she'd come around. The kids would be okay in a few days, and he would really have to stop getting high, but he didn't think that would happen soon. He knew that something had changed about his getting high, though. But now was not the time to think about it. He was hurting, and he needed help. He felt in his pockets for his stash, and he didn't find anything. He had a bottle of brandy hidden under the sink behind the cleaning supplies. He fell to his knees and began to pull everything from the cabinet looking for the bottle, but it wasn't there. Now what was he going to do? Now he had to face his wife without a drink or a line. He just didn't know what to do. He didn't want to face her at all. Besides that, he felt like he had to get better to die. He needed to straighten out to get a grip on life, but first he needed a drink or a line. Maybe a joint would be better. But he had to get his stuff. He had to face them. Oh God, what was going on in him? He turned and faced the door. His hands were trembling. He could not feel like this anymore. He needed a little of the hair of the dog that bit him, and then he'd be okay. He couldn't face them, and make everything okay. He pulled the door open to face the punishment, and the bedroom was a mess. It looked as though a hurricane had blown through it. Drawers were pulled out from the dresser, clothes were thrown everywhere, but it was only his clothes. He looked in the closet. Where were her clothes? He looked across the hall into the girls' room. It was not torn up like theirs was, right, but it looked empty except for the furniture. Where were the dolls and the toy? Where were the girls? Down the hall to his son's room, he found it was exactly the same. The rest of the house was just as empty as life. Where were they? What had they done? What did they think they were doing to him? What had they done to him? How could they leave him? How could he do this? How could they do this to him? This story happens every day somewhere in your city and in your church. A man's addiction is tearing his family apart. Children frightened and abused and robbed of their childhood by drugs and violence. Emotional scars and broken behavior are all too common occurrences in our children's lives because of the addiction to drugs and alcohol. I write this book with a desire to help explain the true nature of the sinful behavior and how it is not only rampant in the world, but also alive and thriving in the church today. The pastor staffs of today's churches are ill-equipped to handle the problems created by substance abuse and habitual behavior. How many seminaries teach leaders about the facts of addiction, dysfunction, and other broken family systems? Where do they learn to deal with the problems faced by those who are bound by their addictions? Where do we learn to deal with the problems? Oops. The altar call is not the end all. What do we do with those who are faced with the trap the devil has set to keep them captive, to do his will? Why do we have so many periodic users in the church, and why is it so difficult to keep addicts clean and sober? Today, there are a growing number of former addicts, call them delivered addicts, that have found grace and mercy of Jesus Christ and given the call to the ministry. Today, most churches are pastored by those who never faced the demons of addiction. Churches and church leaders are lost when it comes to dealing with addiction. There are several reasons why we've fallen behind and always seem to be catching up, but never making it. We have the ultimate answer. The answer is salvation through Jesus Christ and submitting to the leadership of the Holy Spirit. It is not hard to be delivered, but sometimes it's difficult to stay that way. It takes a combination of different disciplines to bring a person from delivery to restoration. It is definitely spiritual, part medical, and another part physical that has to be addressed if recovery is the end of this reconciliation. Body, mind, and spirit working together to bring about the necessary changes that allow a person to become willing to surrender totally that they may live again. Stay tuned. We'll read the first chapter next time. time around.